think we're good.
Fantastic. We should have people joining, filing in. All right. Perfect. Thanks, Heather. Appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Appreciate everyone as you make your way in the door here. This is going to be a great session. We get to have our friend Will Brooks from Fifth Wall along for the ride. Our goal is to be able to condense a lot of the things we've learned over the last few years and really help you understand your role as a IT and security leader and how cyber insurance would affect you and how do you use it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and keep moving here. Let's talk through the agenda very quickly here. We'll get into a little bit of the introductions and some of the objectives. We'll get into cyber insurance basics. We'll cover the coverage pillars. That will be a hot topic. That's one that's commonly discussed anytime we're doing some advisory engagements or incident response workshops. We'll talk about some of the items that you really need to keep in mind when you're engaging your cybersecurity insurance policy. These things are, we'll get into the pitfalls and some of the lessons learned as we've progressed. Those came about real life experiences. We'll talk a little bit about engaging Fifth Wall, and then we'll get into some Q&A sessions. Now, one bit of housekeeping. If there is something that does pop up that is very relevant to a particular slide or topic that we're on, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We'll try to pull it up and do it while it's hot. If it is going to be something very expansive and we may not be able to get through it in the course of that particular slide, we may put it in the parking lot and then come back into the Q&A section. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's talk about our speakers. So I'm going to introduce Will Brooks here. So Will, knowing you for a little while now, you're my insurance guru. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I could give you all this information on here, but at the end of the day, I am what's called a channel chief at Fifth Wall Solutions. Fifth Wall Solutions, I know we're going to talk about a little bit more, but we specialize in cyber insurance. That's all we do. We don't touch any other lines of insurance. And I'm what's called the channel chief, which is a totally made up title in the space where I work, which effectively just means I work with partners like CoreTech to help enable them to have webinars like this and dive real deep into the cyber insurance space so that we can make sure that the security that they're offering and the security work that they do aligns with what insurance carriers are looking for to make the whole process a lot easier, because as we'll go over, it's gotten really complicated. So that's what I'm here to talk about today.
Oh, it definitely has gotten more complicated. It's amazing how often I speak to my peers and customers and just the industry in general about how to navigate cyber insurance, and also how do you make sure the things that you're doing in your program translate to effectively reducing, well, one, your risk of having to use it, but two, making sure you get credit for it when you pay your premiums.
Yep.
So that's something to keep in mind. Now, I come from a background of IT and security, been doing this a little while, and it's a pleasure to be here with you, Will.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thanks for having me on.
So let's talk. We touched on it a little bit here, Fifth Wall. So let's talk about Fifth Wall and why it's so important. Well, take it away.
Yeah, so super simply, Fifth Wall got started in 2015 because one day we realized, hey, cyber insurance is becoming this thing, and most insurance agents who have been doing every other line of business out there has no idea what cyber insurance is. So we got started in 2015 working with local agents in Pittsburgh saying, hey, we'll take care of all the cyber insurance stuff for you. All you got to do is get out there and gauge interest for it and talk about it. What we then did in 2020 when the world went remote and carriers started to get a lot more complicated is say, hey, we're going to start working with businesses like CoreTech to say, actually, it's you who's going to be able to benefit your clients around cyber insurance the most, because the largest hurdle right now is the security side of things. Without good security, you're not going to have an easy time getting cyber insurance, or at least good cyber insurance. So Fifth Wall specifically partners with businesses like CoreTech to make cyber insurance a lot easier for their clients.
Yeah, fantastic. We really do appreciate all the expertise that you've given to the industry, because it's one of those things, it's tough, and the requirements to get good coverage has changed.
Yeah.
What does good coverage mean has changed. That it's constantly evolving, and that's where we need help like this. Now, CoreTech, we've been around. We're I think 19 years. We're in the IT and security implementation managed services. Do we a lot. We've been Azure Expert MSP for many years. Our real role is helping our customers understand their business objectives and then implement the right security and IT solutions to create those business outcomes they're looking for. And as things have changed, security, compliance, data privacy, all of those continue to be more and more important in those solutions. The other part is, as we partner with our customers and we have those relationships with the CISOs and CIOs and CXOs at large, as we learn things as a practice, we try to share that with the community. And that's why this session exists, is as we learn more about the cyber insurance space and the needs of our customers, we're trying to educate everyone. So that flows into our objectives here. CoreTech really, over the years, we have a security advisory practice that also does incident response and incident recovery workshops. We do workshops around building and maintaining a security practice. We also have a full SOC XDR, organization. We also do incident recovery. Within all of that construct, and as well as the CXO roundtables that we do, the cyber insurance, how to use it, when to use it, how to avoid pitfalls, I will say within the last year has been an incredibly hot topic, and you can tell who's had to use it because it's changing the way they think about what coverage looks like. What is the benefit of your carrier? How easy are they to work with? These things have come up, and we really didn't talk about cyber insurance a couple of years ago, but now it's a very hot topic. On the outcome side, we really want to help you understand very tactically around, some of the coverage of cyber insurance. What are some of the pitfalls, understanding when to use it, and we'll get into a case study here. And then we'll also talk about, hey, here's some things you want to look into, and then at the end of this, here's our goal, is that if you have cyber insurance that you're happy or not happy with, if you have had an incident, you need to, re-up, renew, maybe you're looking for a new policy. We went through a similar process. We always like to tell people the things that we recommend are things that we do ourselves internally. We recommended the doing the session with Fifth Wall to understand our insurance coverage and where the gaps were. Absolutely worth the time and investment. So that's something to keep in mind, and we want to help you either work with us to get involved with Fifth Wall or how to go to Fifth Wall directly. So a quick synopsis. This shouldn't be too much news. In 2024, the rate, severity, and magnitude of cybersecurity incidents has grown, and the amount of people having to utilize their cyber liability coverage has changed. It used to be a very once in a while thing. Now it's not. And at the heart of it, it's not magic. It is still a insurance policy. And I bring that up because some people, it changes with, I have insurance, I'm fine. Well, I understand what you're saying, but reality is, do you have the right coverage? A lot of people really don't. And you have to look at it, it's a safety net, right? You have to understand your policy. And when I tell people this, I still get the occasional, well, I have insurance, I'm covered. That's not how it works. I have health insurance. It doesn't mean I want to go jump in front of a bus. Your cyber insurance will not take the pain out of what happens. It'll just help you recover. So that's why we always say the best insurance to have is one you don't have to use. But if you have to use it, make sure it's the right one.
Yep. It's the kind of thing you don't want to you don't want to need and not have. You want to have it and not need it, right? And that last point you have on there, understand your policy. That and to what you brought up about what Cortex doing, the incident response component, cyber insurance, whether people like it or not, is becoming a major component of incident response. And if you have the wrong kind of coverage, then when you go to activate that cyber insurance and file a claim, if the carrier looks at it and says, "Oh, well, we don't cover this type of cyber incident," well, now you're in a rough spot because you just spent a lot of money on something that's not going to cover you. So knowing the attack vectors, knowing how to deal with them, and knowing what type of coverage is going to fit your risk uniquely as a business is really important. There's no one size fits all for cyber.
That's the truth. And it's funny, people learn that lesson the hard way.
Yeah.
It's when, and you go to anyone, you can tell they've been through it, because you will ask them, what did you learn? And that's the first thing they'll talk about is, I did not have what I needed. The other thing that is often discussed, I do a lot of CEO roundtables where we talk cybersecurity, and insurance comes up 100% of the time.
Sure.
And one of the misconceptions that I always have to help people understand is, because you have insurance doesn't mean you get to stand back and throw away the keys. Like, insurance, take the wheel. That's not how it works during an event. It's your responsibility. Insurance is help you to cover monetarily what has happened. Now, some may offer additional services, but you have to understand your role and your responsibility in recovery.
Yeah. Now, the one benefit of cyber insurance to that point, and we're going to get to the coverages themselves, but I don't even know if we are. So one of the really important parts to cyber insurance is there are a lot of things that you're on the hook for when there's an incident. There's getting forensics involved. There's legal fees. There's here we go, payroll,
Yep.
PCI fines. There's penalties you have to pay. There's credit monitoring, there's notification. Depending on the state you live in, there are actually laws around notification on when you have to and who you have to notify. And I look at that stuff and I say, man, if I had to do that all by myself, I would be a mess. Now, there are other things you definitely need to handle yourself, but a lot of that stuff, the carrier is going to bring in someone and say, hey, we can do that for you. Or if you're working with someone like Cortec and they have someone on retainer too, they can help there. But there are a lot of pieces to an incident that we're not usually thinking of, because we're in the place where we're saying, my system's down, I can't work, I need to get back to work, Brian, fix it. And the reality is, Brian's going to say, I can't touch this until this crime scene has been investigated, right? And that's often where the stress point is, because so many people are so anxious to get their business back up and running that sometimes they'll restore their systems and completely eliminate a lot of the data that was necessary to know just how far reaching this incident is, which leads to future fines, future lawsuits, all this kind of stuff that we're not thinking of because we're in that moment.
Oh, 100%. I've been on cases where really they're like, put it back, I don't care. You put it back, but you didn't know what the original source was. Within a few hours, the environment's compromised again. It's gone. So there is a logistical follow through. Like, there is a process to this. And we'll talk a little bit later on some of those details, but you have to follow the process. What I will say in all of these years, and remember, I'm also a consumer, right? I've used cyber insurance for cases over the last 20 years, 10 years, somewhere in there. But I've also helped customers as part of an advisory. There is a difference in what those offerings look like with those carriers. Some are very much transactional. They really want to pay as little as possible, make sure it doesn't happen again, get the claim out the door and cover it. They don't have a lot of additional services. They may point you in the direction of maybe some preferred third-party counsel or IR firms, but they're a cash umbrella. There are others that we've worked with that are really understanding, and they do get a lot of repeat business from people signing up and telling their friends, because they do have those relationships. They have an incident response legal team available that's part of the service. They have partners they know and they like. There's a lot more guidance that they provide. They don't necessarily do it themselves, but they have those partners in place. The big thing, what makes success more attainable for those carriers is they make it available to you up front so you can get your house in order. And the other piece is, and this is why I loved doing the session with Fifth Wall, is I did not realize all of the areas that come under good coverage. You know, I've been doing this a long time, and I had about 90% of it in my head of what needed to be covered. Most of it learned the hard way. But there's a lot here. Now, one thing I will say, we're not going to cover this slide in detail, right? You just have to understand the pillars. If you really are looking to get into the details of this, and many executives that are purchasing or renewing their insurance will, you know, here's my shameless plug. We have a session for that. It's coming up in July. We will get into more depth of those pillars and what those coverages look like, what kind of cases are there. Also, if you've had an incident, how do you go about making sure that you have all of your bases covered to be able to renew or maybe get a different policy? Because you're inevitably your rates are going to go up, and you want to have the best value for your dollar. So that's something to keep in mind. It will be myself and Will again, so you get to see us chatting and carrying on one more time. But that's what we have coming up. So if you have anyone in your network that you know is buying, renewing, upgrading, or really wants to understand their coverage, this will be a great session coming up in July. This session does focus more on the tactical side of using cyber insurance.
Yeah, the one thing I'd bring up about the pillars here, rather than going into all the details, and Brian, you kind of alluded to it, is there are so many different attack vectors out there. And the reality is that a lot of cyber insurance policies are more concerned with the third party protection and not protecting your business. And when you really get down to the nitty gritty, you say, wait a minute, most of these cyber attacks affect me. Yes, there's the liability component. There's, oh, I have customer data, or maybe I have contractual obligations. But at the end of the day, your business is down. You need to recover. There are a lot of issues there. And then a carrier might look at it and say, well, yeah, you did have an incident, but we don't cover that kind, right? You don't want to be the person who files a claim and the carrier says, oh, we don't cover that kind of claim, right? You want to make sure you're carrying the right coverage. So that's where this next session that we do in July is going to be really helpful.
Exactly. So as promised, let's talk through basically a timeline. I'm going to walk through a scenario because I do see these a lot. I've been helping organizations handle incident response for a long time. And what I'll tell you is here's a general progression of how it goes. Right? First things first, I always tell people you need to have your house in order. That means having your understanding all of your business critical processes, which now gets into what are those assets? How do I recover those assets? Do I have a plan to handle an incident and recover those assets? Do I have all the right third parties? Do I understand my insurance? Do I have the data I need offline in case a ransomware takes out my environment? Preparation is key. You can shave weeks off of a incident recovery timeline by having your house in order. So that's the one thing I would give you. That's key, because really at some point it's going to happen. Right? And it's a little cliche to say it's not if but when, but the statistics back it up. And not everything is going to be a big bang. So at some point you're going to have your SOC, some person, your team, someone is going to notice something that's anomalous, that could be bad, might not be bad, you don't know. And this is the first step. Figure out, what is it? Is there a degree of credibility that this could be bad? And then what I tell you is this is the step where you send a notice to your insurance that you are investigating an event of interest at this time, and that you will provide updates as the investigation continues. So you're not necessarily opening a claim, but you started a clock. Because if it's nothing, you've not let the genie out of the bottle. Because it does happen. You will have false positives, or you'll have something that maybe you can contain and handle internally. Maybe you're going to use some of your IR hours. You don't need to invoke insurance yet. Small incidents happen. but that's your go, no go. Is it bigger? Okay, it is bigger. I have all the indicators that it is bigger. So the next step is, okay, now we have to trigger the full entourage of my technical experts, my third-party IR firm, my incident recovery firm. Maybe in the case of ransomware, I need to actually create a claim with insurance and engage any of the resources that are mandated or recommended. And that's important. That is a structural step that if you don't understand it, it can take time, and time matters, because in order to get to recovery and being back in business, you want to shorten all of these steps as much as possible. So Will, and up to that point, any other advice? Because I'm going to keep on going.
I think that's perfect. Creating the insurance claim. A lot of times at this point, even earlier, but a lot of times at this point, you're doing what's called putting, before you identify the incident, you could always put your carrier on notice first and just call and say, hey, we've identified something, we're investigating, but we just want to let you know, so that they can start allocating resources should it turn into something, right? I mean, there's always that opportunity. My thought process is, you're bringing up the length of time it takes for a claim or a whole incident to play out. If we can get the insurance company to engage sooner, that means that insurance component, which some people get nervous is going to take too long to begin with, can be enacted faster. So to put them on notice so that they can at least be aware can often be a really helpful tactic. Again, not mandatory, but I mean, it can be helpful in speeding things up.
Yeah, the other piece to add is having that line in the sand that you've started the notice process. A lot of people will wait until the communication phase to get the insurance. But the thing is, you lose time. So I tend to bring it up real close.
I like that. I mean, those first 3 arrows are like bam, 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 right? I mean, that's the idea, is you don't want to wait until you've investigated a bunch of stuff to call insurance, because at the end of the day, like you said it, Brian, insurance is still insurance and it takes time. So the sooner we can engage them so that they're moving while we're moving is great.
The other piece that comes into play is if they have certain things that are mandated, in other words, you must use certain carriers or services, you have to have time to get those into place. The other piece is if they have, many have an incident response coach. If you are farther along in your case before you make the claim and you didn't do that initial notice, some carriers will not pay out, will not cover the things that they did not have a material influence in the outcome, right? Not all are like that. I have seen it where people waited too long and they've already started spending a lot of money and all the things. And the insurance carrier said, listen, we could have stopped this sooner with our services. We're going to pay starting this date because that's when you gave us a notice.
Yep, exactly. And a lot of policies, again, we'll get into this in the next one, but a lot of policies have a window of time before those services start to pay out, right? So it'll say 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. I mean, you don't want to wait 24 hours into an incident before the carrier starts saying, all right, we're going to help your business interruption. We're going to help your there's these components of a policy that are going to help your business not only navigate all that legal stuff, but stay afloat while the incident happens and your networks are down. But if you're waiting eight hours, so 1 business day, 2 business days, 4 business days for that to even kick in, you're going to run into some stress, right? So you want to make sure you look at your policy, know what that window is, and then say, wait, I want to make sure I get them aware of this early, so I'm not waiting 8 hours after we've done all this investigation stuff. So yeah.
100%. Then I also include insurance, because a lot of times many carriers have a really good support network. You do have to keep them updated on what's happening, because they may be letting you know something along the lines of how much coverage do you have, because they really want you to understand how much you're spending. Because if your coverage, let's say your coverage is only $1 million, you're rolling in and it's going to exceed that. That's on your tab.
Yep.
So you want to make sure you're always communicating.
It's good.
And then as you make your way, obviously isolate, contain, thoroughly remediate. We mentioned earlier, some people try to put the cart before the horse, like, oh, I'm just going to put it back. There's time for your incident response team to actually figure out, how did the bad guy get in? Did they leave any alternate ways in? Is there a date or time I can roll back to? you're going to have to figure out what's the extent, and then from there you're going to remediate. In other words, you're going to close the doors and windows the bad guy tried to get in. You're going to recover and maybe if restore. In other words, you may have to go back in time and just say this is lost. I'm going to go back in time, or in the worst case, you're going to have to rebuild. And all of that takes time, and it is the more impactful it is, the more expensive it is, the longer it takes. And I say that because when you get to the end, you need to learn from the mistakes. You need to catalog what did and didn't happen in case there's additional lawsuits and things that can happen afterward. You're going to go through this process. You may not necessarily close your claim right as you're finished. Parts of it may have to stay open in case there's ongoing pieces of that claim. So maybe you finished it and you've used all of your ransomware and business availability components, but now you're going to go on because of reputational damage or having to have coverage for payout of credit monitoring, things of that nature. So don't expect it all to end right there. So you want to work with your insurance carrier because it's going to be a lasting relationship as you're trying to close out all the pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and let's talk pitfalls.
Oh boy.
I know almost all of these have been learned. Well, actually, all of them have been learned the hard way on cases, depending on what people have. This is the one thing I really want people to understand. Different insurance carriers are good about being there for you. Some are really transactional. At the end of the day, they really do want to minimize payout and the possibility of a reoccurrence. Right? Those are two huge drivers, and you have to understand that in their mentality, because sometimes the ones that really get into the driver's seat, they're driving to that, not necessarily always your best interests. So there might be some conflict there. Some are a little bit more agreeable, some are more hands-off. Those are things to keep in mind. So looking at disbursement issues, we mentioned earlier, if you report too late or maybe you don't have the right coverage, you're not going to get paid out on it. Now you still incur the cost, and that's a hit to the business. The other piece, it really comes under, you have to understand the full cause of what happened. But also along the way, many times insurance carriers may require that one, proof from a third party that the initial cause of the incident has been fully remediated. Two, if there's anything else critical discovered as part of that process, you're going to have to fix that too, because they don't want a reoccurrence. Right? So that's something to keep in mind. Here's an interesting one. I'm seeing more of these, where as they're going through and you're going through the process, you get to the end and now the insurance is getting ready to start writing out checks or maybe fulfilling the rest of the checks, right? They're getting to the end. They're going to go and look and basically validate the things that you filled in that questionnaire to get you to the insurance. They're going to validate that all of those are accurate. I have a case where the environment was hit because a administrative account for some reason didn't have multi-factor authentication enabled. There was a reason. I'm not aware of the reason, but ultimately that was the vector that led to a series of vulnerabilities that led to that account, and then it went viral from there. In this case, the customer said all accounts have multi-factor authentication enabled. So you can kind of see what happened here. The insurance went, okay, well, we understand the report that it was an account with administrative access that did not have MFA enabled, something that you clearly stated that you had done. So that became a very interesting conversation. I don't know all the details. I do suspect there was some financial repercussions for that. But this goes back to, you need to be very concise and clear in what you put in the discovery documents, and you need to do it everywhere because it will be checked on renewal, possibly as part of a payout on an incident. The other thing that go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's probably one of the most crucial things for you as a business owner, you as someone at a business, for filling out those forms, especially if you're in the IT space. I mean, if you have someone coming to you and saying, oh, well, I got this insurance application, I need to fill it out. hey, can you answer these? Because I don't know what any of this means, right? You need to make sure you're answering those diligently, because insurance, even though we're talking cyber insurance and we would think it's more tech savvy, it's not tech savvy. You're still engaging in traditional insurance, which means you are entering into a contractual agreement. Basically, the carrier says, we will pay the claims if everything on the application is true, right? And you're saying when you submit that application and sign it, everything on here we attest to be true. So if it's not, the carrier is actually under no obligation to pay that claim to you. Now, that's not to say carriers aren't sniffing out opportunities to not pay claims, because at the end of the day, that's bad publicity for them. However, to Brian's point, they may try to minimize that payment. They may try to change things up. And at the end of the day, be truthful on that, because when they write that policy, don't be afraid you're not going to get a policy. If they write the policy and you were truthful on that form, the courts are going to side with you. That's just the reality. But if you fudge your answers on that form, or you have no idea what you're answering and you just check yes to everything, well, now the carrier is probably going to come back and do an investigation and say, oh, well, this incident happened because you didn't have MFA turned on here, but you said you did, so we don't want to pay this. And It's really that simple.
And it manifests in different ways, but it's something to keep in mind. One of the biggest things that we do as part of our advisory is helping people understand their environment enough to fill in the documents. It comes up quite a bit. So
that's great.
Make sure, get the right help on that. Sometimes the people that are purchasing it are not technologists. There's a lot of times it's a CFO, COO, what have you. Talk to your technologist, talk to any of your partners that may be handling some of your environment, get the real answers, kind of go from there. The other thing, when we talk about getting your house in order, part of that is really understanding who are the third parties you'll need when things go awry. So your incident response firm, right? Those are the people that are going to help you, detect, find the bad guys, do the forensics. They really are that boots on the ground, helping you figure out what happened. And then you're going to have an incident recovery team. They're geared towards getting you back up and running. They tend to be a suite of very experienced IT and security professionals that know how to remediate, rebuild, build new. They're doing the construction side. Everyone's used to, after you have a fire, you have firefighters. It's incident response. After the fire, this is where you have the companies that come in and do the restoration. That's a key piece. That's often forgotten until it's too late. And I bring that up because some carriers, they want only preferred. So you have to work off their list. And just because they're on the list doesn't guarantee you a seat. That's one thing I hear a lot is, oh, I have insurance. They've already taken care of this. Then they call the insurance. And sure enough, they're like, no, you have to have a, some kind of retainer or contract with someone on the list so that you get to the top of the line when you have an issue. We will pay for it. And that's something people really don't figure out until later. So this is where some people get burned. They'll bring in their preferred partner. Maybe it's something where they're not on the list, but they've already been using them as part of the engagement. Or the other one is maybe the rate that is guaranteed in the coverage is less than what is being provided by that third-party partner. So that's something to keep in mind. And then after the payment, we kind of covered this. It could raise rates, could cancel the policy. We talked about the assessment. The one thing to keep in mind that I'm seeing more is some legal action. It may not be towards you. It may be towards other partners or systems or third parties because insurance wants to recoup. You do want to keep that in mind in case that's something that comes out of it and you're not used to having those kinds of discussions. So it's just the world we live in today.
That's good. I'm not going to get all insurance-y. That was well explained. I'm not going to use terms that are confusing. This is good.
Oh, lessons learned. Actually, Will, I'm going to let you take a couple stabs on this one, and then I'm going to pick up on the end.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna dig into like the specifics of all of these things. But one of the reasons this is so important when you look at some of this stuff, so plan that fits your needs with enough coverage, right? We talked about that before. So you want coverage that uniquely fits your risk, and you also need to know how to activate that coverage. Because if you don't, well, to Brian's point, hey, does my carrier require me to bring in my own forensics person or my own legal team, or are they going to provide one for me? You don't want to know, you don't want to have to find out that answer when it's too late, right? So you need to understand, you also need to know, okay, wait, my business makes X amount in revenue, but I've been just given this policy. Is that enough to meet my needs? I don't know, right? So that's the kind of stuff you want to figure out before an incident actually happens, because if it does and the answer is no to either of those things, well, now you're in trouble, right? Because now you have to, you're in a rough spot. Again, practicing that incident response is really important. Having copies of your policy, just like all your other stuff, backups are really important, right? It's a huge component of good cybersecurity hygiene. Same goes for your insurance policy. Don't just have it saved on your computer that now your system is hacked and you can't access your insurance policy information because you saved it in the one spot you can't access now, right? So have a physical copy, have it backed up somewhere, completely off your system, whatever's going to be helpful, right? It's just that kind of stuff. And then going back, again, understanding your response and restoration recovery services. Know, and this goes back to what Brian, you said earlier, we have to practice incident response and we have to know how we're going to navigate an incident. If that includes insurance because you have a policy, know how to file a claim, know how to get that process started. But either way, you really need to know how you're going to navigate an incident. It's like a fire drill when you were in school, right? I mean, when the fire alarm went off, you had to get into a line with your peers and you knew there was a specific route you had to take to get out of the building and stand in a very specific spot. Incident response is, I mean, it's not that exact metaphor, but it's that kind of approach where there is directions and there's routes and there's ways you have to navigate that you need to know, because it is a highly it is a high time of heightened anxiety, right? I mean, during that time, if you are a business owner, a worker at a business, it doesn't matter, you can't function. Stress is coming in from every angle. So if you at least have that rational direction to say, all right, I'm stressed, I'm nervous, I'm worried, but I know the plan. That's, I think, the most important piece of all of this. And if insurance is part of that, which I'm biased, but it should be, you need to know how to get that involved as well. So those are kind of my thoughts there. Brian, what else you got?
Continuing on that path, I have worked with a lot of different insurance carriers over the years as we've helped organizations from an incident response or incident recovery. And I'll tell you, the ones that have either prescribed or included guidance, from a lawyer or, from an incident recovery team, or, really having experienced partners as part of your cadre, right? Your core group, when that stress hits, it will help you cut through the fog of the moment, because there are people like me that have been through hundreds of these. We know what it looks like. We know what good looks like. We know what the wrong steps are. Having those partners ready to go at a moment's notice will save you a ton of stress. I've seen all sorts of things happen. It is not uncharacteristic for someone or multiple people to leave an organization during an incident, shortly after an incident, or up to a year later, because maybe they're so worried that that incident will happen again, that maybe the remediations won't hold, they'll leave. And they're almost always key people because they were the most involved in the response and recovery. So that's where having those partners ready to go and making sure you have the insurance coverage, because at the end of the day, you need those partners. If it's not covered by your policy, you're paying out of pocket and it will be expensive.
Yeah.
The other thing, if you don't have a retainer in place, in other words, pre-negotiated rates, the ad hoc rates are going to be expensive.
Very true. Yeah, it's not, again, it's that whole thing. You want to have that stuff figured out and planned out. And that's where incident response planning is a lot more involved than just writing out some navigation rules. It's literally saying there are a lot of elements and pieces. And that's why working with someone who understands incident response is so important. If you're just, oh, we're going to create our own self-attested internal incident response plan, there are a lot of factors worth considering. So just make sure you check all those boxes.
Exactly. And the last piece, that plan needs to include a prioritized list. What are the most critical business processes? What are the systems and their priority to support that?
Uh-huh.
Because that insurance coverage is a finite amount. So at some point, you're going to reach the end of the bucket. And depending on how bad the incident is and how big or small that bucket is, you may have to make some choices, right? Using the fire analogy, you may put the whole house back together, but you may not be able to refinish the basement because you ran out of insurance money. That's a reality. Plan for it in advance so you can make smart decisions.
Yep.
So let's talk about the next thing. This is one of my favorite topics. If you need help on this space, again, CoreTech does not sell insurance. That is not the business we're in. We provide advisory services. We help people sometimes, to avoid situations like this or in their darkest, incidents. We came across Fifth Wall in our own journey of understanding our cyber insurance and also helping others that are in our customer base. So if you're a CoreTech customer today, feel free to reach out to your rep. We can facilitate that conversation. Not a CoreTech customer, maybe with another service provider, reach out to Fifth Wall directly. If you're a service provider, this might be beneficial for a service provider you're using elsewhere. Talk to them. I'm telling you this as someone's been in the service provider side of the industry over 20 years. This is something every service provider needs to be understanding and helping their customers get to good insurance. Because at the end of the day, when something bad happens, you want the best for your customers. So just something to put in there. Now, what do I need to know? I'm going to leave this over to Will because this is his area of expertise.
Yeah, first thing I would say, I'm going to actually skip down to the fourth bullet point. It says 2 to 3 weeks for shopping. Think if your renewal's 90 days out, that's when you want to get started. That seems like a long time, and I understand that seems like a long time. But carriers, and I think this will be a topic of the next one, but carriers very often are looking for more security controls. That list continues to grow, and you want to make sure you not only have the right security in place, but if more is needed, that you have a pathway to get those things in place. Because what all too often happens is fill out that renewal form, check those boxes. It's 2 days before renewal because insurance takes its sweet time. And then the underwriter gets back to your agent and says, oh, you need to add this security control. So you have 48 hours to add something that typically takes a week or 2 weeks. And now that means you're probably paying more for the security because your service provider has to do emergency work. You're stressed because you're paying more money than you realized you would have to pay for an additional security measure. And you may get non-renewed if it's not done in time. So it creates a lot of issues. So think 90 days out is when I want to get started. Now, with all that in mind, again, business information, super important. Know your revenue, know what your industry is. Those are industry, revenue, and security are the 3 most important pieces of information for cyber insurance. Yes, know your coverage limits, but also on the other side of that, if you come to Fifth Wall, if you go to your CoreTech rep or you reach out to us directly, we'll literally tell you what your limits are. We'll do a side-by-side comparison of your current policy with what you should have. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I don't know. We'll also tell you if your limits are high enough, honestly. That's based on your revenue. That's based on the frequency of attack on your industry. We have all that information and that data. But also, I would say, with all that aside, know the biggest thing, know your renewal date, get involved 90 days out. And in all honesty, if your service provider and your insurance agent aren't having conversations, make them become friends. Because one of the biggest things I tell my service provider partners is if you're going up to your client and you're asking them about cyber insurance, and like, oh, well, I deal with that with my agent. The first question they should be asking is, how come I haven't met your agent before? Because cyber insurance, and as you saw from this talk, cyber insurance, cybersecurity, they are linked together, unlike every other line of insurance, which is kind of just insurance. This one directly relies on some very important stuff for your business, so the two should be really close together.
Fantastic. Now, one thing I do want, let's see if there's any questions out there. Usually there's one or two. One thing to note, it's kind of like a doctor's visit. You may not have the questions now, but they may pop into your head later. Feel free to reach out. We're going to have our contact information out there. Will and I are available. There's some really incredibly smart and experienced people within the Fifth Wall organization. I can't stress enough how much I've learned about my own policies and coverage. I thought I knew this space. I learned quite a bit. And this is the reason why we're doing this series. We really want people to understand and be prepared. So with that, do we have any questions out there?
The only question I see out here is, have you ever seen payouts denied?
Yes.
Yes.
There's actually a well-documented court case from 2022, I think, where a business, and the reason it happened was because a business lied about their security control posture. They said, we have MFA on all our accounts. They didn't, and the claim got denied because the reason the attack happened was because MFA was not put in place. So the carrier looked at it and said, we don't want to pay this, and the courts supported the carrier. They said, no, this was a blatant misrepresentation on your application. So that is why I think it's so, and shameless plug, Fifth Wall, we actually will help you understand what the questions carriers are actually asking mean when it comes to that, right? Because it does get confusing. It's this kind of thing where you look at it and say, this seems like a very black and white question for something that in my head doesn't seem so black and white. So what are the carriers actually asking about? What actually matters? That's what we want to help coach you through.
Yeah, that was probably one of the best parts of the session, is just understanding what are they really asking, because most of the time it's not technologists that are asking the questions. So you need that little bit of translation of what are they really asking? How do I actually answer? It's worth the time.
Yeah, big time.
Now, one thing, this is a question I get a lot. It came about from a case where there was a wire transfer fraud. So it involved email briefly, but then after that, it was a business process. And in that case, when they went to their cyber insurance carrier, it was denied because the coverage they had was very specific. And in this case, because it was wire fraud, it came under a different category. I think it was like fraudulent directive, or there was some other pieces to it. Do you familiar with what kind of case?
I don't know that case, but I know a separate one. So go ahead and finish your story.
Yeah.
And I have
So in that
else.
case, they thought, oh, I'm covered. They went through the whole process. They weren't able to recover the funds because they'd already left the country. At the end of the day, they had to pay for everything. There were some pieces they were able to get covered, but the reality is the bulk and that specific, the wire transfers weren't, because it wasn't covered. And this is where I bring things up to people. If you look at those pillars, and we'll make the slides available, look at those pillars and the categories that are covered, because they're not your typical categories that you think of when you think of cyber insurance.
Yep.
But they do absolutely have to be covered, because I've seen cases in every one of those categories. And one thing, some of it is like the payroll piece. People are like, really? Is that a thing? Absolutely it is. And people try to put it as a cyber claim, but if they don't have that coverage, doesn't get paid out.
Right. The other story I know of is similar. It's a wire transfer fraud issue, but this is the other thing, and I know we'll hit on this in the next one, but know not just your limits on your policy, but also what your sublimits are. Sublimits are coverage items that are less than that total. Oh, I have $1 million in coverage. Well, there are some things on there that say you don't have $1 million in coverage. So there was this one story where a business had a wire transfer fraud issue where they had $1 million policy, and they were like, oh, we have $1 million, and they lost $600,000 from a wire transfer fraud case. And they went and filed a claim thinking, oh, well, we'll get all that money back because we have insurance. Well, it turns out wire transfer was only covered to $100,000. So they were out $500,000 because they didn't know what their sublimits were on their policy, and they ended up probably paying for a cheap policy just thinking, oh, I have $1 million, because maybe they were led wrong, right? But the idea is you want to make sure you know that you want to maximize those sublimits. You're always going to have some, but if you can maximize the amount those are covered for and minimize how many coverages actually have them, you're going to be in a much better spot.
Yeah, and that's definitely a topic we'll cover in the July session.
Great.
Right, that's it comes up a lot. Are there any other questions, Heather? Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up.
No, that is all the questions.
It was awesome.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for your time. If you have questions, please reach out. We're more than happy to help, share our experiences. this is a topic that should be shared with everyone in the industry. So please feel free to forward on, links to the recording or our contact information. Everyone needs cyber insurance, and this is information to help them get the right coverage they need. Fantastic. Thanks again, Will. I really do appreciate it. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody.